Hello, and welcome to Locutors of Trek, the podcast where we talk about the people, places, and things of Star Trek. So, replicate yourself a Romulan ale or your Synthos selection of choice and join us far beyond the stars.
Locutors of Trek.
Program initiated. Enter when ready.
Hello. Welcome back to Locutors of Trek. We are taking the last word in our name seriously, really seriously this week. It's all about trekking.
We're trekking.
We're talking about transportation this week, from here to there and back again. Now, mostly, when we think about Star Trek and transportation, we think about a couple of things: transporters and warp drives. But there's impulse drive. There are solar sails. Wormholes. There are any number of ways of getting from here to there, and sometimes even back again.
Imagination.
My craft is powered by it.
It's an endless supply.
Indeed. Just like my hot air.
You gotta break orbit somehow.
That's true. Hot gas helps.
It might be a new sentence. Well, I think before we get into the main theme of transportation, I thought we would start with our top 5 ship designs.
Top 5 ship designs. Okay.
Not our favorite ships. Very different. Because the ships that we see often, Defiant, Enterprise, Voyager,
Sure.
probably gain sentimental value.
Mm-hmm. You're thinking more like ship designs or ship classes here. Is that what I'm to understand? Not an individual instance of said ship.
No, class or, yes, design. Whether
Sure.
it be aesthetics, functionality,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you think.
Okay.
You want to start us off?
I definitely can. Going from 5 to 1. As we all know, I'm a master of lists.
We like an ascending order on this show.
Okay. Be prepared to be astounded. Number 5
Number 5.
is those lovely Vulcan Cruisers from Enterprise, with the warp ring that goes around them, and oh man, they are gorgeous starships. They remind me of...
Well, I might as well just interrupt you for a second.
Is that your number 5 as well?
It is, so let's just have a conversation. The only thing I could find is that it's maybe the Nevar class.
Okay, I couldn't find a name for it at all. They just called it like Vulcan Cruiser.
The Nevar in the Enterprise,
Mhm.
so maybe it's the name of the class.
Could be.
Not sure. But yeah, I like that one as well. The
Yeah.
detachable warp ring.
Which is a great idea.
I like the simplicity of just like the cylindrical kind of
Mhm.
pointed both end kind of vessel.
Yeah.
Very, very space. It can go in either direction and not look weird.
And its efficiency of design and the sort of sleekness of it, to me, speaks to the values that you see also expressed in things like Vulcan jewelry or Vulcan art, which is often intended more to convey something for meditation than to evoke an emotional response. And these ships, while they are kind of majestic, they really do come across as tightly functional yet beautiful objects, you know?
It does seem a very Vulcan design.
Yeah.
Simple, but very functional.
Mm-hmm.
Very logical.
And, a powerful vessel, but not built to exert power.
No.
Or assert power, sorry. Not built to assert power.
No, it doesn't have that look of a threatening ship.
Yeah.
It may have been a Nevar class that came to Earth in the first contact.
May have been.
I don't think we don't see it.
No, we just see whatever landing craft they're using to come down to the surface.
But if it was, not very threatening compared to probably the rest of the ones on my list.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So how do you want to proceed from here?
Well, you should go again.
I should go again. Dang, yo. Okay, so my next ship is a lot of ships, actually. It's been variously called a Licepian Freighter. It's shown up in a number of TNG episodes.
Interesting.
And it seems to me to point to starship manufacturers that are meeting civilian and commercial needs that aren't just sort of the big governmental starships that Starfleet types drive around in. And this is it's sort of a wedge-shaped ship.
So we see this in several episodes, you said.
Oh yeah, you've seen it several times docked with Deep Space Nine. You've seen it in a ton of episodes. Vaguely kind of triangular or wedge-shaped with a slightly dipping nose on the front. Oh yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite ships.
I'm going to have to look for that.
Because it just refers to this whole other world of travel, because as far as I can tell, and when they often run into civilian vessels, they'll say these sorts of things. Most of these vessels can't get above warp 6. So there's this whole region, socioculturally, of people that are traveling at, they could travel at a few hundred times the speed of light, but that still means that you're taking whatever it would be, 59 standard days to get between Earth and Bajor, let's say. Mm-hmm. Right? Whereas a Starfleet ship at warp 9.3, which might be a high operating speed, but one they can maintain for a while, could make it there in 10 to 14 days. So there are these lanes almost of travel in the galaxy where certain people and certain groups can get places incredibly quickly, and that gives them a kind of political potency and an efficacy in terms of law enforcement and sort of peacekeeping and other activities that just isn't available to a huge proportion of the population of the galaxy, Federation or elsewhere.
So my number 4 is the Cardassian Galor class vessel. Mm-hmm. I like the Stingray look of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe Cardassia has a Stingray type creature.
Maybe.
I do like the biology of Star Trek and the world and the universe, so it'll be interesting. Mm-hmm. We'll get to our biology themed episode.
Sure.
Pretty soon.
Have to talk about a Tarkalian hawk.
Oh, I love Tarkalian
Odo's
hawks.
favorite creature ever.
It's true.
Yeah, the Galor class is an interesting one.
Yes. It's a powerful ship.
Mm-hmm.
To me, now the Cardassians are often seen as a hostile kind of race, but I don't really see them as that. I see them very kind of on par with the Federation in a lot of ways. Although, I mean, not with the occupation and all that stuff, but in they make a lot of bad decisions, I think, the Cardassian Empire.
Well, they seem to have
military run.
Well, they seem to have decided to, when the Tatapa Council came around, they seem to have decided upon a social strategy or an economic strategy that was aggressively expansionist in order to satisfy the needs of the Cardassian people who were ravaged by hunger and disease at the time. And that, I think, in some ways what you see is the trauma of their own culture having to rip itself apart from its own roots in some sense in order to get somewhere where they can feed themselves again and do the medicine they need. And that ends up churning out this very paranoid, very purposely duplicitous, purposely treacherous culture where those qualities are seen as the qualities of an astute person.
I mean, like a Romulan light. Not
in
quite the Romulans.
There are comparisons to be made,
Romulans
absolutely.
embrace that, really.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and where the Romulans, you might say, were originally a kind of allegory, you might say, in some sense, for the Cold War and the Russians.
And the Romans.
Sure, and the Romans, of course, on that kind of model. The Cardassians, to me, seem to be, and maybe this just shows that I'm not that great on contemporary geopolitics, but they don't seem to have a kind of strict analog in sort of contemporary history that way. And maybe, I'm sure you could find enough pieces to make it, to make it fit in various places, but I'm not sure that's how they were originally built to be. The sense of the occupation and that sort of stuff draws them toward elements of the sort of Third Reich or elements of other genocides that have gone on in the 20th century, say Cambodia or other places like that, but an occupying force doing the genocide, right, as opposed to an occupying part of the same political body.
The beauty of them is that they are more of a created civilization rather than, because a lot of the ones in Star Trek, the Klingons could be the Viking samurais,
Sure.
But the Cardassians are very much, let's create a sociological situation, let's create a political situation. Yeah, it's harder to just pinpoint and kind of think of them as some sort of analog.
Yeah, I really think it is. And they're given enough depth over the course of Deep Space Nine as well as over TNG that I think we get a picture that just makes them sort of Cardassians after a while, as opposed to ersatz anything else.
The ship looks like a stingray.
That's true.
Which I think's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I like the color. Like, there's a lot of grays, greens, and stuff in Star Trek, and they kind of have that orangish, beige brown.
Sure.
Which you sort of see with, like, Ferengi ships and stuff. Which I didn't make my list, but I do like the Ferengi Marauder a lot. I'm going to drop in. I'm going to cheat and try to, like, talk about as many other designs as I can. Like, I'm going to do an aside right now. Didn't make my list, but I love the Tholian web ships. Because they're just like little, they look like the ships from Asteroids on the Atari.
Oh, they absolutely do. Yeah.
We just dated ourselves.
That's true.
Great game. And they're just little triangles. That's all you really need.
Yeah, just blow up rocks.
Like if I had a shuttle, it would just be a Tholian. Anyway, didn't make my list. I'm cheating. Back to you.
Okay.
We're on number 3.
We're on number 3.
Number 3.
So, number 3 for me is reaching backwards a little bit in the sort of history, canonically, of what's going on. Number 3 for me are the Suliban Hive ships.
Oh, yes.
I loved those things. I loved the whole, the appearance of the Suliban.
Me too.
How they show up in the series, but also their physical appearance. I loved the sense of this, hyper modified species that did everything from cyberware to genetic modification, because they wanted to develop so quickly. And those little ships are just great. How they can lock up into larger assemblies. It's just, it really gets to that kid that loved Lego in me, plus it's spaceships.
It's like Power Ranger ships.
Yeah, they could make a Voltron if they wanted.
Yeah, Voltron.
I am left foot.
Why do I always have to be the left foot, guys? Yeah, good ships. Yeah.
They're interesting. And, they...
Enterprise had some cool ships.
They did. Even, some of those... that Romulan, hologram ship thing was pretty great.
Oh, the prototype.
Yeah. That crazy drone.
Yeah, and it would do those barrel rolls and that very cool.
Yeah, it was a neat vessel. They had some great ideas. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, my number 3 is outright cheating.
Oh no.
Yes. I couldn't decide what my favorite Federation ship was.
Okay.
Because, I sort of know what it is, but there needs to be a special mention. My number 3. In its purest form, is the Olympic class.
Olympic? Oh.
The Olympic class is usually used as a medical or science vessel. It's the one that has the sphere.
Oh, yeah!
And the reason I like that ship is, when it comes to Federation ships, I really like things that kind of speak visually to what they're trying to do. It didn't make my list, but I liked because it's not the most aesthetically pleasing, but the Defiant, what I like about the Defiant is it kind of looks just like a weapon. It looks like what it should do. It's like it doesn't want to get hit by fire and carry
Absolutely.
weapons.
It's pure fighter.
But what I like about the Olympic class is it doesn't look like a fighter at all. It's a medical or science ship, and it's just this big bulb that could be easily hit by anything. And I just really like the look of it. It kind of speaks to some sort of retro, which will...
Oh, it's a very 60s look.
Come into my cheating in a second. Yeah, it's that orb planet in space. because the retro thing, you sort of spinning to create your own gravity.
Sure.
And
And there seems to have been a lineage of classes in that, too. I think the
Yeah.
old Daedalus class
Yeah.
was the warship version of an Olympic, right?
Mhm.
And apparently participated in the Earth-Romulan War in the late 2150s, 2160s, right?
But where I'm cheating is I'm also going to throw in almost every version of the Enterprise.
Okay, how are you going to shoehorn this in under
Watch
the Olympic
what I do
class?
here.
All right.
Watch
This is the
be
Olympics
amazed.
of cheating. Ha ha ha.
This is what's called beautiful cheating. Just watch.
Okay.
So, what I love about the Enterprise class, and there's other classes of Federation ship that could fit this idea as well, but I love old kind of 50s sci-fi aesthetic.
Oh, sure.
And I would say the sort of the original Enterprise on, not original as in NX-01, but on TOS.
Sure.
I love that aesthetic of that ship. But what I love is the idea of a flying saucer, because that's how we saw,
Oh, yeah.
people saw spacecraft in the day.
Mm-hmm.
A flying saucer just attached to some nacelles. I just love that idea and that aesthetic, and that's what the Galaxy class, the NX-01.
It's the
I mean, they
basic
all do
design
it.
of Starfleet vessels. Exactly, yeah.
So I would just maybe not even so much say cheating with saying the Enterprise, but just the flying saucer idea attached to some nacelles. Love
No,
it.
it's
Love it.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, it's funny. I suppose in that sense, you kind of make a cheater out of me too, because
Ha! I don't feel so bad now.
it lets me widen out the point I'm going to make here for my number 2,
Oh, you're welcome.
which is I was going to say, because I just love it so much, the Burrell design of the Bird of Prey.
Okay, Dave, let me interrupt you right here.
Uh-huh.
My number 2 is also the Klingon Bird of Prey, if that's where you're going with this.
Well, what I was going to say was it allows us to widen our thoughts out, though, to the D7 and D5.
Okay, I wasn't going to... So what is your pick? The Bird of Prey or the D7? Very different.
They're but they're
Now I've spoiled my pick.
really
But
beautifully
anyway.
iconic ships. You know what? I'm going to say in the end it's going to be the D7.
Oh, now I shouldn't have spoiled mine, but
'Cause
now we
it's-
know. We're going Klingons for number 2.
It's such a weird, ungainly looking ship with that like long mast toward the head and everything.
I love the D7 as well.
But it's it's just this really powerful vessel, you know, and evokes really beautifully the sense of Klingons taking risk, you know, because that vessel configuration is not for the faint of heart. It's for people who want to put their weapons up front and get themselves perched way out over where the disruptors are going to fire, so that when they decide to fire the big sort of torpedo cannon under their bridge, they can really just smash you to pieces, because their plan is just to mess up your day. You know, it's just so evocative and powerful. Anyway, go ahead.
It's interesting the mirroring we've had in this list again.
Indeed.
But yeah, mine's the Klingon Bird of Prey, whether it be Burrell, whatever. It doesn't matter the size. I do like ships that sort of present what they are, and it looks menacing. It's fast. It's agile.
When those wings go up and down.
It just looks like an attack vessel.
Oh, absolutely.
And-
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it really does.
And I just love I love ships that have that sort of biological design as well. I like the flying saucers and that kind of retro design, but also the biological designs like the Galler class with the Stingray, and this one with the Hawk look. Oh, I love it. And even with the functional sort of wings up and down and everything.
Oh, yeah.
It's just,
Well, you know,
it's
one
just
of-
a gorgeous ship. The paint job that accompanies it.
Oh, yeah.
The green, and they kind of define the features of the bird and everything.
And there's a whole body of stuff that's developed around that too, right? You know, the legends of Kahless talking about the Bird of Prey as the method of attack they were going to use to defeat a superior force. You know, it's, you know, I love the depth that they can give to kind of flesh something out like that, right? And once you've got a great iconic design like that, you can paint in a world around it.
So number 2, we love Klingon ships. I guess is what we're saying.
Pretty much, yeah.
Negvar class we didn't bring up.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, our old band.
Yeah.
Warcha and the
Yeah,
Negbars.
Warchaws and the Nagbars.
Yep.
And then those, again, I think are, in a certain sense, a kind of mediation between the two designs.
Yeah.
Because they're more structured
Agreed.
design in one sense than the Burrell, but they're a much meatier and short-necked ship than a D7 or a D5 would be.
And the most intimidating of them all, kind of, in the look.
Oh, yeah.
Which is why it's the one that the Emperor, not the Emperor,
Oh, the Chancellor.
The
Oh, yeah, with
Chancellor.
those mandibles coming out the front of it and everything. Oh, yeah. It really looks like it's out to get you.
Dave, you're number one.
My number one ship design of all time is a ship we see on screen for 1.5 seconds.
Good Lord. What is it?
And it's destroyed when we do it. NCC 65491 was the ship we were seeing. The USS Kyushu.
The Kyushu.
Named as
Admiral
the Enterprise.
359.
Exactly. My favorite
my.
ship class, my favorite exemplar of that class.
What does the Kyushu look like, Dave?
The Kyushu looks like, so if you took a Galaxy-style saucer section, Galaxy-style engineering section, but the warp nacelles come off the join between the saucer and the engineering section, laterally backward to where they would be positioned like on a Galaxy class, but so they're attaching much closer to the saucer section. And this would be a ship that's about just a little or maybe 3/5 the size of a Galaxy in length, about 18 decks. But its other really salient feature is that two things I'll mention, I guess. First one is, three. They never expect the Spanish Inquisition. So first one is that design-wise, it features 3 exterior pods that can be attached. 2 at the back of the saucer section on each side of the main shuttle bay, and 1 under the bottom of the ventral engineering hull. These were often, especially because the ship design was in heavy rotation in the Cardassian border wars, they were often used as extra torpedo launching stations. So this little ship with Galaxy-sized impulse engines would come into battle with, these 3 extra torpedo fore and aft tubes that would have, 25, 40 torpedoes apiece in them. And just be sort of running gunboats through battles. Now, they could be replaced with science pods, colony starter pods, tractor pods for towing things, all sorts of crazy stuff, medical pods. So the ship was very versatile. It's designated as a light cruiser. And so that brings me to the second cool thing about it. Second cool thing is that it's the sort of first in the design lineage that culminates in the Galaxy class. So it would have been these ships, New Orleans class, originating a lot of these newer sort of elliptical saucer sections and those smoother lines and different warp field geometry and all that stuff, moving then into the Nebula class and then being finalized and brought to its sort of full power fruition in the Galaxy classes. And all 3 of them, this is the third and maybe coolest thing, were from the design mind, of course, of Leah Brahms.
Leah.
So Leah Brahms was instrumental in the New Orleans, the Nebula, and the Galaxy class ships. And I love that tie.
Holographic fantasies.
And, instrumental in at least one holographic fantasy that we know of.
At least one. But it's a big Starfleet out there, so.
That's true. There's probably a fan club. Yeah, great ships. Great ships.
Interesting.
And the pods were originally kit-bashed on with marker cases.
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, my number one is one of my favorite designs of anything. My favorite ship in any sci-fi. I just love this design. Every time I see it, it just makes me happy. It is the D'Deridex class Romulan Warbird. To me, there's almost nothing more beautiful than a D'Deridex class Romulan Warbird. If I could have a giant D'Deridex class or a real D'Deridex class Romulan Warbird to just display. because, I don't want
I
to...
keep it on the lawn.
I'm kind of don't like flying. Or, space is also scary.
Oh, I'd be
I
there
just
in a
I
minute.
just want to look at it. Walk around in it maybe. Now, I love Romulan ships in general because, again, it has that kind of biology component. It looks like an eagle.
Oh, very much has that beak sort of
The
feel
beak,
to
and
it.
they carve all the lines into it, and it has an eye.
Yeah.
It's even more resembling an animal than like a Klingon ship. Especially that face. It just screams spaceship to me too, because it has that huge space in the middle of it that's just empty space.
Yeah.
To me, that's space. If you don't need that extra space on your ship, just don't build it in. It's not like you need to be wind resistant or anything like that, or like
Yeah. It reminds me of something, and I
the
wonder
color
if,
of it as well.
I wonder if the Romulan ships like that would suffer the same problem in the old Enterprise D technical manual that they published, 1.5 eons ago. They make this lovely point that the kinds of materials from which the Enterprise is built are specified for spaceflight. And that while the saucer is intended ultimately to be able to make a terrestrial landing, it's not intended to ever come back up again. And should the whole ship try and do that, it would end up sagging under its own mass and just sort of drooping like a wilted cauliflower cabbage leaf to the ground, right? Because they're not built for the kind of stresses that kind of gravity would put it under if it was not powered with a structural integrity field.
No, it's so heavy.
Yeah. And it wouldn't even really be able to handle a lot of the acceleration.
In the design of it. I do like spaceships that look like spaceships, though. And, yeah, the Dared X class. A nod to the Valdor class, which I really love, because it also it looks like a really cool bird. But it just looks too brittle. Like,
it looks more like a bird of prey.
Bird of prey get shot out of the sky with, like, a single phaser blast all the time, because they're very brittle as well. But the Valdor looks even worse. It's just, I wouldn't want to go into battle on a Valdor.
It's
or really even a bird of prey, but at least bird of prey look a little more nimble.
Well, and the bird of preys are just such devastating weapons. They're twice the size of a galaxy. They're 1,200 some meters in length.
And so effective
massive.
In atmosphere as well. Like, they don't have that galaxy class problem or anything. That they can they're very aerodynamic. They just fly right in there. And
Well, I suppose one of the virtues of the Klingon ships as well is that they behave very well in atmosphere. And that may be part of the design choices there. If they want to use them to land troops as well as do anything else, come right from warping in straight to the planet's surface. Makes sense for an attack boat like that or a ship like that.
Well, the Klingons don't change their designs very often.
No.
If it ain't broke.
That's true.
Well, Dave, let's have a technobabble.
Okay.
This technobabble, I thought we could talk about the physics of interstellar travel.
Yay!
Yeah, I'll try to keep Dave to under 45 minutes. And I'll try to keep him to under 20 to 25 on Alcubierre. I can't promise anything. We can talk about warp drives. We can talk about transporters. The Heisenberg compensator.
Oh, yeah.
How does the Heisenberg compensator work?
Very well.
Very well.
Indeed.
Okay. That's all we need to say about the Heisenberg compensator.
Oh, yeah. There really is nothing more to say about it.
It works very well.
Is your refrigerator running? No. So you want to start with warp, or do you want to start with something else?
Alphabetical. Let's start with Alcubierre and go.
So in what would it be? 98, I think. A guy named Miguel Alcubierre, who was working at a university in the States at the time, I believe, went to a physics conference and read a paper proposing the mathematics for how to actually warp space-time such that you could achieve a warp-like effect as in Star Trek. He was a big Star Trek fan himself and wanted to... Well, clearly his favorite character maybe is Ephraim Cochrane, or at least I think it should be one of his favorites, I hope, anyway.
At least symbolically.
Indeed. Miguel Alcubierre, if you'd ever like to be a guest on this program and tell us more about warp drive, please. Anytime. You're welcome.
In fact, I won't even show up. I'll let you and Dave just go to it.
It's the 9-hour supplemental episode
Yeah.
you've all been waiting for. So he had done the math. He had worked out a metric for determining what criteria you need to meet in order to have a drive like this. Not that he had worked out technical specifications. That's a whole nother breathless topic. But
This can be a long technobabble.
oh, this might be the rest of the episode. You never know. But he had, in summary, worked out that a device which could produce for itself a gravitational wave with an orientation such that space behind, theoretically behind the craft, in the direction it was leaving, would be stretching
Shrinking.
out back to normal.
Or back to
And
normal,
in front of it would be compressing like the wave front coming off the bow of a ship. The vessel should ideally simply fall down that gravitational hillside, you might say.
It's like riding a wave.
Like riding a wave. And because of the compression of space-time in front of it, arrive at its destination before light would arrive there.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, of course, what makes things like the famous, or if you're Ferengi, infamous, Picard maneuver a possibility, right? The ship arrived there slightly before its image did, and so visually there were two stargazers all at once. So, now, Alcubierre's original math did make the point that exotic materials would be required to develop the fluctuation of positive and negative energy required to set up this gravimetric wave to the tune of the energy density of the entire observable universe.
Yeah.
Which is, needless to say, a lot. Now, later versions
Not
of,
impossible.
but expensive to say the least. And once you consumed it getting there, there's not much point making the trip. There was some really cool stuff here before we ate it with our star drive. No, but later figures, one guy named Harold White, who had worked with NASA and at other places, I think Jet Propulsion Labs maybe, but don't quote me on that, I'm probably wrong. And then later another fellow named Froning, both took a look at this and got interested in Alcubierre's original work and devised through their own work. Froning in particular did work on conditioned photons, establishing a kind of barrier around the ship, which would function like shields, but actually a whole lot better, in order to insulate the craft from other inertial frames, ultimately. So you can sort of move it, in a sense, without reference to other drag or inertial considerations. And so you can move at an arbitrary speed through space-time at that rate. Now, they also were able to demonstrate that energy requirements could be theoretically scaled down, I think, to the size at this point of, or the sort of energy density of something like Jupiter or the moon, maybe. Still a lot, but, infinitely less than the entire observable universe, right? So this is leaps and bounds more doable than it was even in 1998. So in 23 years, we've come an awful long way. We've only got, it's 2021, we've only got 42 years to go. And, a couple of months until April 5th. So we're not doing too bad.
Not too bad.
Nope. So that's warp drive.
Just need a third world war.
And some augments to have happened, 15 years ago. But, whatever.
Oh, the augments are coming.
Yeah, so that's pretty much warp drive, maybe for,
warp
for
drive.
The technical side of it.
Oh, wonderful dilithium. Because
Yeah.
Of course, the problem is the power source.
Well, and
They're just using antimatter, which
yep.
a lot of theories today try to use antimatter.
And I think, the sense of the annihilation of that sort
But
of...
it's how do you do that? And
Yeah.
the answer to that is dilithium.
And that's certainly been the Star Trek answer to that.
Yeah.
I don't know whether dilithium actually does that, because there are dilithium crystals on this planet. I don't know if they're particularly useful for focusing a antimatter annihilation reaction, but they certainly exist.
Yeah.
But the sense of being able to harness that pure explosion of energy,
Plus being able to create antimatter.
sure, and which is more energetic than even a fusion reaction, right? Is one of the ways in which these folks are developing. Star Trek people, I guess I'm saying, are these folks, are able to develop the kinds of energies required to travel at warp speeds, because they are requiring vast amounts of energy, such that their impulse engines run on dedicated fusion reactors that just do that. And then the real meat of the space flight is accomplished by this matter-antimatter reaction drive, which is tremendously complex to run and sets up this unstable set of field dynamics that the Federation, and actually many other species as you look at it, manage with paired nacelle projectors that sort of make a kind of hum-canceling field around the starship such that it doesn't get itself ripped apart or annihilated. And interestingly, NASA, I guess 3 or 4 years ago now, put out a short video proposing their sort of dream concept vehicle for a warp craft. And this would be, if you imagine almost like a series of pancakes of different sizes, smaller and then bigger and then smaller toward the other end, as a craft, with then 2 large toruses going around it, like the Vulcan warp rings. Mm-hmm. That's the craft they were looking at. And they were thinking that the torus at the front and at the rear of the craft would help balance the field around it so it wouldn't be annihilated or stretched in all sorts of bizarre ways as it was moving through space, right? So again, there's a real world application of that dual emitter logic that Star Trek's working with.
Without warp, the only other way to get such a distance is transporting.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, you need warp first, because you have to set up the transporter on the other end. So, inevitably, you need warp.
Yes.
But if we want to kind of transition out of technobabble into our main theme, we could pick that up with the Enterprise episode, Daedalus.
Ah.
So, the Enterprise episode, Daedalus, features Dr. Emery Erickson, who was a friend of Jonathan Archer's father, Henry Archer.
Right.
They were contemporaries, where Henry was trying to develop warp drive, and Emery believed in the transporter, thinking interplanetary transporting was the way to go. And just developing the transporter in general.
Sure.
He was the first one to go through.
That's right.
And then he lost his lunch.
Yeah.
As one does when testing out new transporter technologies.
Well, and it's the disorientation that's involved has been often remarked upon, right?
Mm-hmm. Transporter psychosis, like we'll get into in a minute, but we're not there yet.
So what he's developed is this technology that converts the matter of the body into energy.
Information and energy.
And takes that pattern of information, transmits it, and recombines that into the matter of the person's body, which is pretty nifty, just right off the bat.
Which immediately brings up the question, does that destroy the individual and create a new individual? Now, Emery would tell you that's crazy. He doesn't believe that.
He believes the substance of the individual transmits.
It's just turning that individual into information and then reconstituting that individual.
Out of information.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's something quite elegant about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now...
especially for him, the inventor, to believe
strongly
in his...
I mean, there are folks like, Thomas Riker, who might take issue with that interpretation. But, Emery may be able to say that...
I thought we agreed we would never discuss Thomas Riker on this podcast.
The trombone pact of Stardate 10156.
Broken already. Episode 3.
I'm still suffering the effects of the time loop. Oh, I said I wouldn't talk about that either.
Well,
It's all gone to pot now. Anyway, the transporter.
the transporter. The question being, yes, exactly. Does it destroy the individual?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Dave?
It's a lovely kind of sci-fi way of taking the old ship analogy from philosophy. You know, the ship leaves shore, it gets repaired and replaced and all sorts of things, but never comes back to the shore. By the time it does eventually go into port, every piece of it has been replaced at some point or another. Is it still the same ship? And, you know, we could say the same thing about the human body. We often hear the trope that, you know, every 7 years, pretty much every part of your body has been
Regenerated.
replaced or regenerated. You know, are you still the same person? I would argue that...
Regeneration cycle complete.
Well, I would argue that the question itself asks about a subsistence and a substantiality of person that relies on consciousness as opposed to either matter or energy. Consciousness as a distinct quality.
This is something beyond the physical and energy of the person.
Exactly.
Is there a soul that's destroyed and doesn't carry on? And that's often what's brought up in Star Trek.
Yeah.
With that argument.
Yeah. And we know that...
In Enterprise, a lot of the people were very uncomfortable with it.
Absolutely.
New technology.
On what amount to sort of psychospiritual grounds, right? Yes. What will I abide? Will I be the same thing I am now and understand and feel myself to be the same when I've been recombined?
In contrast to in TNG era, where Geordi is telling Reg that transporting is just the safest way to travel.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Reg, of course, finds out it absolutely is not the 100% safest way to travel.
In the episode Realm of Fear.
Yes. Yeah. A great body horror episode of Star Trek.
Yeah. Where he's talking about just that, where Reg is questioning, because Reg is a really smart guy. He's questioning the transporter on the fundamental level, where he's just like, I don't know that is me necessarily coming through on the other end. And what about transporter psychosis? Like, what if one neuron is off in your brain on the other end? Good questions. And everyone just kind of shrugs it off. And Geordi's just like, well, no, it's the safest way to travel. Like people say about airplanes now, but I'm still a little scared about airplanes sometimes.
Well, you know, the early modern philosopher John Locke applied this same question to sleeping and waking, right? He said, so when I sleep, I don't have consciousness of anything around me. And sometimes I have consciousness of really weird stuff. But I don't remember it once I wake up. Where am I during those times when I'm asleep? And am I a continuous person, even though there are, you know, say 6 or 4 or 10 hours during which I'm completely unconscious and not really kind of there? How do I abide if I'm punctuated at points in time? You know? Although it does bring up a nifty point about travel. I think visually to see a ship using a bubble of sort of its own personal inertia or warp bubble around it, moving at a relatively slow rate through atmosphere would look like you'd see it and not see it, and it would just blip through. You know, because it's moving across the peaks of bent space, whereas you're seeing it all laid out.
You're seeing space.
Yeah. I think you would see it appear and reappear and reappear and reappear. You know?
Like the end of a sphere, of a ball. Like you're just seeing the part of the ball
you might
that
even
touches
only
the
see
ground.
Parts or moments of it.
Of the ship.
Yeah. Maybe we've just explained all UFO footage right there. God, we're getting a lot of work done here.
Talk about hot takes. We're getting the real hot takes. Episode 3.
Here we are.
There we are.
We're getting tetchy.
Well, and that brings up the interesting thing about warp travel, which is the bending of space and what effect that would have. Now, we know Starfleet has that regulation where you're not supposed to engage warp within a solar system. You have to get a certain distance away.
Sure.
Because
you're supposed to get a certain number of diameters.
What happens to the space on the periphery of the space you're bending? Like
Sure. And you know that comes up
like
in
water.
And that's a great question, because in some cases we know that space-time is bent, say, by large masses, right? So Earth, for instance, or the sun or whatever, or even really big masses like big stars. But the sense in which one of these ships would vary in a highly local sense, a 600 or 800 meter bubble, say, around the Enterprise D. So just under a kilometer of sort of length, or, whoever knows how many thousand cubic meters in there, would be almost in a sense isolated from the
What's
surrounding
that in
space. And getting
tessipate?
now you're testing my limits. Tessipates. I don't even know it in Kelly cams. Anyway.
Continue, I'll do the tessipate calculations.
Thank you. I'm glad for your 2 semesters on Ferenginar now. So, when they're moving like that, I think being close to that would be disastrous for you, because I can only assume that the shields at that speed are doing just what somebody like, I think it's Froning, would argue, that they'll just simply deflect normal matter away as a matter of course. And it's only things like highly energetic particle beams or that sort of stuff that would even begin to affect you at warp speeds. Because the warp bubble itself would be, in one sense, stronger than the shields, even though it could be destabilized more easily.
2.75 tessipate.
To what?
The warp bubble over the...
Oh, which 600 meters would be about 2.75
2.75 tessipate.
Wow. Well, you learn something every day. Tessipate. Tessipate's a pretty big measurement.
Well, farmland and whatnot.
That's true. I suppose that's true. All the way to the river.
Yep.
Yeah, but we know that this stresses the fabric of space-time as well, though, right? The sort of kind of pushing things through it like bugs bunnying through the ground, sort of through space-time.
Well,
it leaves ripple effects and stresses its fabric.
Well, the TNG episode Force of Nature.
Thank you.
Brings that up.
Yeah.
And, of course, the title Force of Nature is also talking about the guest character who eventually commits her entire life, her life itself, to her cause. And her brother comments on how she's a force of nature.
Yeah.
Great character. Geez, that character could have came up in our best one-off
characters.
characters.
That's true.
From the other episode.
That's true.
Another great character.
We're going to have to do more of those lists.
That list is going to come up again. A lot of our things will repeat.
Part 2, Part 3, Part N.
Certain themes may repeat. Some themes are pretty big, and we'll come back to those. Yeah. But that episode is a bit of an analogy to environmental damage on Earth.
Sure.
Pollution and...
Yeah, the way that the entire system is affected.
Carbon emissions and things like that.
Yeah, by what looks like a pretty incidental thing in some cases, right?
But this, now I don't remember that character's name. Tragic. But she's on the Enterprise to try to convince them that warp travel, especially at very high warp speeds, is in fact incredibly damaging to space, but especially on a regional level, which kind of speaks to things like rainforests and coral reefs.
Yeah, their area of space was particularly fragile.
So, as it is with any kind of ecosystem or planetary system or solar system.
Sure. Which, when you get to looking at our solar system and the heliopause and all the stuff around it, it looks more and more like a single-celled organism all the time at some point, right?
Everything's just scaled up or scaled down.
Yeah, indeed.
And, Picard, especially Geordi, are very resistant to this. Because they've committed their life to the idea of warp travel and traveling to the stars.
Yeah, both in their own ways. Yeah.
In their own ways. But especially Geordi, he's so defensive because he's on more of the technology level. He's just like, whoa.
He just loves those warp engines. Absolutely.
That hum, it's a pretty nice.
One of my favorite YouTube channels is 12 straight hours of the Enterprise's warp core.
You too?
Oh, man. That's some great stuff.
I don't mind a little DS9 ambiance either, man.
Some people use nature noises. I use spaceships.
That's why we're here today.
That's true.
But yeah, that episode, no one believes her, especially if Picard, who's usually quite open-minded in most situations. But in this one, he's very, like,
Well, it really gets under his skin.
out of character in his closed-mindedness to this idea.
Yeah, I think one of the only
And-
other episodes where you see him react that strongly to something is probably I, Borg. His
Yeah,
initial reactions to Hugh are just so cold,
True.
you know, and just filled with that kind of like leftover
It's not an individual, it's a Borg.
dinner kind of rage. Yeah, it just brings up some.
You
But
gave it a name, it's a Borg.
Yeah.
It's true. Good
Yeah.
point. But this
you know,
is
but
another
his-
one of those times.
yeah, it really hits him where he lives.
And she goes to high warp in a specifically vulnerable place and sets off a tear in subspace to prove her point, which kills her tragically, and proves the point. And that's one of the themes in TNG, which they don't often carry on a lot of themes in that show through several episodes and seasons, but that's something they do carry on, where they really don't try to go at high warp.
Yeah,
Like,
after
there-
that,
You
there's
hear a
quite
lot
a
of
long
warp
while.
fives, a lot of warp sixes and things like that.
Yeah,
It's only when something's getting attacked or something where they go to warp 9, whereas in the earlier seasons they're just warp 9 and all over the
yeah,
galaxy.
their standard cruising speed I think was warp 8
Yeah.
or something like that, right? And I think by the time we're partway through Deep Space Nine, you see the warp speeds picking back up, partly because they're at war,
Yeah.
or variously, whether with the Cardassians or the Klingons or somebody. But also,
And Deep Space Nine doesn't talk a
there's-
lot about what they're doing.
but there is also there is some kind of development, I believe, that they mention at some point through all of that has allowed them to make their warp drives safer again. Some sort of a Heisenberg-y thing, you know, some kind of compensator.
I mean, they're gonna work on the problem, and they're
Yeah.
gonna, yeah.
But having had it demonstrated, they actually, in good faith, begin to work on the problem, right?
It's
Which
just
is-
tragic in that episode that it had to come to that for them to even consider to start working on that problem,
Yeah, absolutely.
which, you know, mirrors a lot of environmental issues on Earth.
Yeah, change is hard to make, especially when you benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And they really do. They get to live a life among the stars.
Freshened up with some Earl Grey here.
Earl Grey hot.
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 In my Cisco's Creole kitchen mug.
I'm so jealous about that mug. Oh, man. So good.
So good. Best gumbo you ever had.
That's right. Ooh, that is hot.
Yeah, too hot, yeah. A little early.
Tea. Too hot.
So we were talking about...
First flight.
No, but we can go there now.
Oh, weren't we?
We were talking
What were we
about
talking
the
about?
environmental impacts
Oh,
on
right.
space.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But let's rewind back to First Flight for a moment.
Sure.
The early days of warp drive, and of course, there's the movie First Contact. We get Zephram Cochrane and Lily in the Phoenix.
Sure.
But there's also the Enterprise episode First Flight, which begins with the death of JG.
Oh, yeah.
Archer's-
Yeah. A.G. Robinson.
AG?
Just a second.
Hold on, we're looking that up. I think you're right. I'm thinking J.G. Hertzler.
Yeah, J.G. Hertzler,
Yeah.
A.G. Robinson. That's
It's
right.
definitely A.G. Robinson. Thanks, Dave. I definitely
trouble.
screwed that up. But great episode. It's showing the difficulty of the early warp trials, just whether it be politically or kind of institutionally dealing with the Vulcans, and even just technologically with like the intermix ratios.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things about the Enterprise series, is it at its best it really did feel like a projection of how we get from where we are to where,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
Kirk and Picard and Cisco and Janeway and all them are.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels a lot closer to us in many ways.
And it just shows the difficulties and the clunkiness of it and the dangers of it, of early warp travel. Like, you know, that's kind of an analogy to the early days of sea travel and the
Sure.
dangers of that, and thinking, you know, are you going to fall off the edge, or are you going to be swallowed up by a monster, or the seas itself? Or,
Sure. Or it's the simple technical problem of taking a bireme or a trireme ship powered mainly by ore power too far away from shore. Right? If you get pushed too far
I
away.
can no longer see shore, now what?
Yeah, and a lot of them were not super deep bottom boats either, right? Which in the case of some craft would help them, but in those large craft, if they got tippy, they were liable to go right over, you know?
So Enterprise I found was really interesting in that way, because they were really having issues with the intermix ratios and just getting warp 1, 2, and 3 and all that sort of work.
Yeah, breaking the warp 2 barrier was a real challenge. But I mean, it's interesting that, at the end of that episode, I think, or not the end, but toward the end of the episode, Archer comments to T'Pol that, it wasn't that long after the events that he's talking about there, after they get the NX beta up to whatever it is, warp 2.3, 2.5, I something is the final speed they end up getting. They get suspended, they come back, they keep working on it, and, within a year, the Vulcans have agreed that the engine works, and then within 5 years, they've built the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
The NX-01. And so there's this jump that they're able to make because they have so many other technical processes coming together that warp is really that kind of linchpin key for them.
Great episode. Good character, played by Keith Carradine.
Oh, yeah.
It was fun seeing Archer and Trip back in those days.
Oh, yeah. I love how buttoned down Archer is as well. Like, he's so determined to be the guy on that flight that he's going to...
Just from a legacy point of view, he just wants to be the
dot
guy.
every I, cross every T. He's going to do it.
So then, we could talk about the idea of wormholes as a means of space travel.
Sure.
Which kind of brings up, or kind of touches on our last episode of time travel, whether that would take you through time as well. But again, you could ask that question with warp travel.
Yeah, how would you screen out time dilation effects is the big question with warp travel, I suppose.
I suppose with wormholes, you wouldn't have any control over that.
No.
It just is what it is, and away you go.
Maybe that's what happened to that Dominion fleet.
Mm-hmm.
They just find themselves...
They're somewhere.
Somewhere. In the future or the past. Or...
In the Delta Quadrant. Attacking a caretaker array.
Just vigorously harming everything in sight till they run out of Ketracel light.
And they turn on each other, and then that's the end of it. So, at least it doesn't last long.
That's true. But yeah, the wormhole near Bajor is, as we all know, the single stable wormhole that's been discovered. And it may have been either constructed or be being maintained by the prophets or the so-called wormhole aliens. Because it's not clear what their relationship to the structure of the wormhole is, but they've clearly got some kind of command over it.
Because it turned out the Barzan wormhole in the TNG episode The Price was not so stable as they thought it was. Where it was stable on one end, but unpredictable on the other. Mm-hmm. So essentially useless for any means of predictable space travel.
Yeah, if you were interested in sending a one-way colony through any time it came by, that would be about its only purpose for you. Right. Or probes or something.
Well, yeah, probes.
Probes might be, but if you can't control where the opening's going to be and there's only a vague schedule of when it might come back that way again, still not terribly functional.
But not nearly profitable enough for those poor Ferengi. Oh. That ended up being
they're taking the long way home.
And sent to the Delta Quadrant. Where they did all right for a while.
Oh, that's true. I forgot we ran into them again in Voyager, didn't we?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Yeah.
False
that was
Prophets.
A great callback.
Great, good episode.
Yeah. Those two feel almost in like they could have been prototypical of the Ferengi we meet in Enterprise as well. They're much more sort of swashbuckling or freebooting than some of the other ways we see Ferengi depicted, say, over the course of Deep Space Nine, where they tend to be more...
organized.
Yeah, but also more fearful in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also the idea of, which I've seen some real-world kind of theories and models of recently, is the idea of solar sails.
Oh, man.
As we see in the DS9 episode Explorers.
One of the best episodes in the whole series.
It's a great episode.
Oh, man.
It's a good father-son bonding moment.
Mm-hmm. One of those great Ben Sisko gets obsessed with something episodes.
Yeah, I love those episodes.
Oh, man, he gets an idea in his head.
I love an obsessed Ben Sisko.
Absolutely. But I love the look of the ship. It's at once nautical, but
Oh, it's
very
gorgeous.
space-worthy.
It has a very, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea kind of
Oh,
feel.
yeah. All that brass and copper look to it. And that he lovingly really takes care of the details to make it Bajoran inside and out, I think is a wonderful statement about where Sisko is as a character. You know, he's really opening up to who his son is becoming as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
He's opening up to Bajor as a fixture in his life and sort of in his soul now.
Mm-hmm.
And to the degree that he wants to try this thing out to see if they can even make it to the Denorius Belt.
Yeah.
You know?
Or Cardassia.
Yeah, let alone.
Cardassian space. They make it to Cardassian space. But quite the coincidence that it turns out that at that very same time the Cardassians found evidence of a Bajoran ship many thousands of years old.
Mm-hmm.
Crashed in Cardassian space.
Yes.
Near the Denorius Belt.
Yeah, it's
Coincidence is fascinating.
I mean, you wonder when they actually found that thing, right?
Like hundreds of years ago.
We're not telling them we have it. No. That's not convenient for us.
If it were Romulans, we'd still never know.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, the idea of solar sails seems nice. It seems very energy efficient, but the speeds at which you could get with that seem a little more questionable. Like they did need some sort of anomaly in that episode. It does seem like a feasible technology for inter-solar system travel. Mm-hmm. Cruising the solar winds to Mars might take a little while, but seems like, energy efficient and like you can probably
sure, and
do
especially
it.
if we're talking about
But at least it's like a reliable source of power.
Yeah, and two humans and some food rations and a little energy generator that powers the lights and heat and that sort of thing in the ship.
The oxygen.
That's a relatively small like they're really traveling on a pretty bare bones craft that way. And so the size of the sails.
That's right.
That's right, because they're storing and having to recycle somehow, I assume. But they're using such a small mass that the size of those sails is the only thing I really ever have a question with the craft, because
they don't seem very big.
They don't seem quite big enough.
No.
Mind you,
they're gorgeous.
They're gorgeous, and if you think about something like Breakthrough Starshot's use of solar sails, and they've been demonstrating the efficacy of them in recent months and years. These are tremendously thin tissues. You need like less than 0.1 grams per square meter aerial mass. At the very least, to even make a sail that won't be so enormously heavy that it can't even really get pushed. It's got to be light enough that it's almost like gauze that you're using to push with sunlight.
Which seems reasonable in, Sisko's era, as far as technology and materials wise, but as far as the ancient Bajorans go, that's
yeah. And I think
but the Bajorans were the
ship itself, I think,
ahead of their time.
That they're modeling it on was an 800-year-old design, but I think they do say that the Bajorans were starfaring long before that even. That they're using a particular design they liked. Yeah, one of the things that always made me think of was I would love to see even, now this is, listen up, CBS and Paramount. I'd love to see a Star Trek short about the inaugural or like the 10th annual Bajor DS9 lightship regatta. Wouldn't that be great to see, a whole fleet of these things having a race
through the Denorius Belt?
Or exactly, right? And that first to get to DS9 and back or whatever.
Who can ride that wave the farthest and fastest?
And now they know they're coming.
And do sweet tricks.
Right? Because if the Tachyon Eddies are coming your way, as opposed to Ben and Jake, who have no idea this is going to happen to them.
Why not do a little flip?
Exactly. Hey, do a flip.
Do a flip.
That's right. Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah.
Warp 10.
Oh. Lizards.
Salamanders, yes. But Warp 10 occupying every point in the universe simultaneously.
Yeah.
And being able to come out at whatever one you want.
It makes me think
and turning into a salamander,
It makes me, again, think of the Iconians. Maybe Warp 10 is the moment where you realize that
You want a gate, not a ship?
we don't need a spaceship anymore.
Yeah,
We've built the drive, we can just step through.
I like that.
And at that point, you're essentially unifying warp and transporters.
Mm-hmm.
So, we
Oh,
can
I like
send
that
ourselves there
too.
and bring ourselves back. We
God,
just open the gate.
You just brought Henry and Emery together, Dave. Always the peacemaker.
That's right. Blessed are the cheesemakers.
Blessed are the cheesemakers.
Indeed, for they shall inherit the mirth. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. But yeah, I think the notion of Warp 10 is sort of their theoretical limit, right? Because a Starfleet style drive or Klingon or whatever would essentially need infinite energy to achieve that. Just like we now say you need infinite energy to get past light speed.
Yeah. Trilithium.
Yes. Try harder anyway.
Pretty sure that's what they used. I think it was trilithium.
Oh God.
I gotta look that up.
But yeah, it's a bit of and honestly, it's a pretty silly episode.
It is.
And it has one of those famously weird
It's like
endings.
It's like my favorite first 10 minutes of an episode that just doesn't pan out, though. I love the idea that, like, Harry and Tom are trying to pursue Warp 10.
Yeah.
And I just like that they tackled it as a concept, because they have these numbers that, like, seems to lead to 10. Mm-hmm. And they just, like, TOS went to Warp 10, but it was, like, really just, like, Warp 7 or something.
Well, yeah, there's a redefinition of the warp scale
Yeah,
between those the 23rd and 24th centuries.
It makes you wonder what Warp 10 is.
Yeah. Because theoretically, that's faster even than you're going with the Traveler.
Yeah.
Except maybe not right at the end.
Qs can travel at Warp 10.
Oh, yeah. Have snap, we'll travel.
Have snap will travel.
Yep. Now, I suppose the only other kind of travel we haven't really talked about other than transwarp is slipstream.
Slipstream and transwarp.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a third.
Oh, what have I missed?
Well, let's talk about transwarp or slipstream.
Gonna keep me in suspense. So now, transwarp, I think, is first unveiled in the TNG episodes The Descent, I think, which is the second reappearance of Hugh.
Yeah.
And Lore together. Well, one of Lore's many appearances.
Lore, what is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
Thank you for not making me finish that.
Got your back. So the transwarp conduits seem to allow speeds that are theoretically, well, they're not faster than warp 10, but they're sort of warp 9 point a bunch of nines.
Yeah, like a whole bunch of nines.
Yeah.
Like going from the edge of the Delta Quadrant to Earth, basically.
Yeah, in just, maybe 2 days or something. It's enormously fast.
Yeah.
And their network is underpinned by some kind of, I think, subspace architecture, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, so it's kind of the same thing with, like, the transporter idea, where you still have to get there in the first place to build the...
Yeah, you've got to set up a kind of node for the conduit.
Yeah, but once you do, it's believable. The idea of a circuit or, space-to-Earth communication or anything that just takes a second or a microsecond or...
Sure. And it's surely... it makes the Borg threat that much more sinister. Because they already know a good deal about the Borg by the time they realize, and they have transwarp conduits. Well, great.
Well, they noticed that happening. They noticed that the Borg could just show up and somehow elude long-range sensors.
Yeah, that's true.
Sensors.
That's true, I suppose, but it takes a long while to really unveil why that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if you look back into the sort of show Bible, if when they developed the Borg, they had that thought initially, or whether they just sort of put it in that they don't show up on sensors because they're nifty and cool, and then later on think, we could have a really cool reason for this.
Maybe they have transwarp and they're nifty and cool.
Dang, Borg. They got it all.
Borgs, what are they good for?
Absolutely. They're futile.
Say it again.
Well,
so the Slipstream, which was also a Tom and Harry thing, wasn't it?
They try to back engineer it.
Yeah.
From a species they've met that employs Slipstream drive.
Right. They try to fit it to void. Well, there isn't that species trying to prove it at the time. It's more of like a slingshot type of thing, where they're just sort of like throwing.
Yes.
Like you need to have that initial. You're not so much flying. It's kind of like the Incredible Hulk. He jumps. He doesn't fly.
Right.
Where you're just being propelled.
Like a projectile
Yeah.
in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, you're being shot like an arrow. Which
Yeah.
If you can be shot like an arrow back to the Alpha Quadrant, cool.
Well, and it makes me think that this would be some kind of effect that would work on the underlying warp field to make it almost more slippery through space, almost, right? I know it kind of turns into a bad pun, but like they always say, soap makes water wetter. In this sense, it seemed to me that it enhances or magnifies the warp effect.
Seemed like another warp 9.9999999 type scenario.
Indeed.
Once you get to those high thresholds of warp, that's a lot. Like those
Oh, yeah.
further decimals of 9 are a lot of space and speed.
Oh yeah, they end up expanding. What is it, logarithmically or something like that, as you get through those decimal points. So yeah, they're traveling at unbelievable multiples of the speed of light, if you're going to measure it that way.
So the mode of travel you're not thinking about is the Mycelial Network.
Oh, right. Mycelial Network.
Now, not so much based in our current understanding of science of space, but what I do like about it is it's, again, a biological kind of analogy, and it's reminiscent of fungal and mycelial mats that we see on Earth.
Absolutely.
That can spread over hundreds of meters unseen under the Earth, which is how they're sort of portrayed unseen in space. And they just sort of travel along that mat as like a nutrient, or
Just a sort of a moat.
or as water would in a mycelial mat. It's a nice idea.
In that
Now,
they're
as
kind
far
of-
as like making it a prominent mode of travel for like Star Trek series, I don't know about that, because it's kind of the Warp 10 thing where you can kind of just pop up anywhere. Kind of takes a bit of the fun out of it.
And when it's just the one ship, for instance, and when Lorca decides to use it to make, 76 different jumps really fast to do this attack,
To like map out a...
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff
that was
you
cool.
can do with
Yeah.
that. And the use of sort of stamets as both
Oh, they were trying to find a cloaked ship
scientist
by like doing all those
exactly.
jumps. Yeah.
And use him as both the sort of the engineer and the engine almost is a lovely treatment as well, right? Because he's got to undergo the movement or the translocation of the ship almost, Yeah, he's just a great character, and he's such a jerk at the start of the series, but
And
he does
ongoing in the series.
Sure, but he does slowly get sort of more
It's true.
open,
Yeah. Well, because
Good
he
old
doesn't want to
mushrooms.
be in Starfleet. He's more of the on the science end of like the Federation more so
Yeah.
than Starfleet. And he's
Yeah.
kind of like
isn't a big fan of
drafted
Starfleet.
into it a bit. Yeah. Well, you see that with characters in other shows too. When you're kind of like coerced into Starfleet a bit, there seems to be some disgruntled feelings that
Paging Ensign Rowe.
Paging Ensign Rowe. Would you like to join Starfleet? No, not really.
Oh, good, you're in Starfleet
Great,
now.
we need a Bajoran to do subversive things. Kira's not into it.
That's true. Well, I think we've covered pretty much all of the modes of transportation I can think of.
Me too. And a lot of the episodes that highlight those.
Well, I suppose, you know what? The only one we haven't covered is ionic wind.
Ionic wind.
How the shuttles fly in atmosphere. How a lot of the floating craft we'd see in Star Trek float in terrestrial spaces. And it's mentioned as ionic wind. I might be in the Ganymede 7.
Okay.
Might be in somewhere else. But this is another one of those things for me that connects with the theme of imagining into reality. Just like Gene Roddenberry talked about a warp drive, and then 30 years later, Miguel Alcubierre wrote a paper giving the math for how to measure or understand warp metrics and travel. Here we have an experiment that was run in, maybe 2015, 2016 at an American university. I think also there was some work at a Canadian one, but I don't recall which exactly did the final experiment, where a professor and several of his students built, looks kind of like one of those old tri-wings or triplane kind of things, but behind the wings are a series of electrodes that are strung across, which have a high voltage running across them, so that as wind comes toward the wings, it's accelerated by an ionic pull toward the electrode, pushed past it, and so increases the lift of the plane. So this plane was able to be sort of pushed off of a pedestal and travel for something like, it might have been 18 or 20 meters with no moving parts and completely unaided by an engine. This balsa wood glider that would be, 8-10 foot wingspan, something like that. And of course they did it without the ionic wind generators and with it, and it got quite a considerable distance further. So flight without moving parts is a reality. We just are at the infancy stage as opposed to the shuttlecraft and, floating wheelbarrow stage. I don't know how tippy they'd end up being. You have to put them into tip mode.
No, I think we covered things pretty well.
I think so. Well, it's been a long
warp,
trip.
You can beam, you can wormhole,
Mm-hmm.
you can slip, you can salamander. Those are, pretty much your options.
That's pretty much it.
Yep.
Yep. Or you could just be an Iconian.
We'll be an Iconian.
They pretty much got
Whatever happened to those Iconians?
Demons of air and light.
Mm.
On that note, I think we're at the close of another episode. So we will rest our weary traveling bones, let the hum of the warp drive gently rock us to sleep, end transmission.
Maybe we should surprise Vic.
Do you think he's going to like that?
Yeah, Vic loves surprises.
Like Frankie Two Eyes surprises?
Yes.
Okay. Let's try it anyway. What can go wrong? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you. Fill my heart with song, let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you.